Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
Blake Shelton thought he had left the drama of The View behind him. But when he returned for another guest spot, things spiraled into one of the most heated showdowns the talk show has seen. The country star sat down expecting to chat about music and family life, but Joy Behar wasted no time steering the conversation into controversial territory. Should divorce laws be stricter to protect families? What followed was a verbal tug-of-war that left the audience gasping and social media ablaze. Blake brought his Oklahoma roots and hard-line opinions about commitment, while Joy, quick on her feet as ever, challenged him with wit and fiery skepticism. Their clash wasn't just about marriage. It became a battle over values, freedom, and the definition of family in today's America. By the time the segment ended, chairs had been pushed back, voices had risen, and viewers had witnessed yet another unforgettable chapter in the ongoing saga of Shelton versus Behar. The audience was buzzing even before Blake Shelton stepped onto the set of The View. His last appearance had turned into an unforgettable spectacle, with him walking off after clashing with Joy Behar about marriage. The producers knew this reunion would be electric, and the crowd could sense it. When Blake finally walked out, cowboy boots clicking against the glossy stage floor, the cheers erupted louder than expected. He flashed a grin, tipping his head to the audience like a country gentleman. "Good to be back," Blake said, drawing out the words in his smooth Oklahoma drawl. "Y'all still remember me after the last time, huh?" Whoopi Goldberg chuckled from her moderator's chair. "Blake, nobody forgets you that fast. You left quite the impression." The banter started light, with a few jokes about his music and time on The Voice. Blake laughed easily, cracking jokes about growing older in country music, and admitting he couldn't quite keep up with the young guns anymore. For a moment, the tension from his past appearance seemed to melt away. Then Whoopi shifted the tone. She leaned forward, her hands folded. "All right, let's get into it. We've been talking about family structures and the legal system today. The big question is, should divorce laws be stricter to protect families?" The audience's applause faded into silence, eyes darting between Joy Behar and Blake. Everyone knew sparks were about to fly. Joy jumped in first, almost eagerly. "Look, divorce is hard enough as it is. Making it stricter? That's basically trapping people in marriages that don't work. Women especially fought for the right to leave bad marriages without being chained to a man for life. Why would we roll back the clock?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Blake adjusted in his chair, his smile slipping just slightly. He cleared his throat. "Well, Joy, I don't think it's about trapping anyone. It's about protecting kids, protecting families. These days, people treat divorce like fast food. You don't like the meal? Toss it out and order another. That ain't right. Marriage should mean something." A few claps rang out from the audience, mixing with murmurs of disagreement. Joy leaned forward, eyes flashing. "Easy for you to say, Blake, but what about women stuck with cheating husbands or in abusive homes? You want stricter laws that keep them from leaving?" Blake shook his head. "That's not what I'm saying. Abuse is a whole different story, and obviously those situations need protection. But most divorces, they're not about abuse. They're about people giving up too easy. I grew up watching families stay together through thick and thin. Now it feels like folks walk away the moment it gets tough, and kids pay the price." The camera cut to the audience, where one woman nodded firmly while another shook her head. The studio was split, the air charged with anticipation. Whoopi, sensing the heat building, tried to balance the discussion. So you're saying, Blake, that stricter laws might encourage couples to work harder at their marriages instead of bailing early? Exactly, Blake replied quickly. You make it harder to break, maybe people think twice before walking down the aisle in the first place. It puts more value back on commitment. Joy crossed her arms, not missing a beat. Or it just keeps people miserable longer. You think every couple that sticks it out ends up happier? Come on. Sometimes divorce is the healthiest choice for the parents and for the kids. Why should the law guilt people into staying? The tension was palpable now. Even Blake's posture shifted. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his usual playful demeanor sharpening into intensity. Because, Joy, he said firmly, when parents split, the kids don't just shrug it off. It changes their whole lives. I've seen it. I've lived it. Stricter divorce laws aren't about guilt. They're about making people stop and remember the vows they made. Joy let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Vows are great, Blake, but you can't legislate morality. You can't make people stay married by force of law. It's unrealistic, and frankly, it's dangerous. The audience stirred again, some clapping, some booing lightly, caught between the two viewpoints. Ana Navarro chimed in cautiously. There's a point on both sides here. Commitment matters, but so does freedom. The question is, where's the balance? But Joy wasn't ready to let go. She turned back to Blake. I think what you're suggesting sounds more like punishment than protection. Do you really think government has the right to tell people how long they should stay married? Blake's jaw tightened. If it keeps families from falling apart so easy, then maybe it does. Maybe we've gotten used to giving up instead of fighting for what matters. That statement landed like a strike. The applause and gasps came at once, some in agreement, others in disbelief. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to settle the storm. And yet, everyone in the room knew it was only the beginning. The calm, light-hearted banter was gone. The stage had been set for something much bigger, much louder, and much more personal. The studio felt hotter now, though no lights had changed. The friendly atmosphere was gone, replaced by a crackle of tension that made the audience lean forward in their seats. The conversation had moved past pleasantries. Blake Shelton and Joy Behar were digging in, and neither looked ready to back down. Joy tapped her cue cards against the table, her eyes sharp. Blake, you're romanticizing something that can be brutal. Not everyone grows up in a house where parents sticking it out worked out well. I've known plenty of women and men who stayed in marriages that were toxic. The kids suffered more because they were forced to watch two people at war under one roof. Blake's expression hardened. He shifted in his chair, his drawl taking on an edge. Joy, you can always pull out worst-case scenarios. I'm not saying people should be chained to someone dangerous. I'm saying we made it too easy to throw away a marriage when you're bored or when life gets tough. That's not what family's supposed to be about. You work at it. The audience clapped at that, a few cheers rising above the noise. Sonny Hostin jumped in, her tone thoughtful but serious. Blake, let me ask you this. Do you think stricter divorce laws would actually make people work harder at their marriages, or would they just delay the inevitable? Because from what I've seen, especially in family courts, kids often fare better when their parents are apart instead of together and constantly fighting. Blake nodded, but his voice sharpened. I get that, Sonny, I do. But I think a lot of fights come from people thinking the door's always open. When you know it's harder to leave, you try harder to fix things. You fight for the family, not against it. Right now, it feels like people don't even give it a shot. Joy leaned forward, cutting him off before he could continue. Or maybe people finally have the freedom to stop pretending. You think in the good old days everybody was happy? Please. Women were stuck in marriages they couldn't escape. They didn't have jobs, they didn't have rights, and divorce was seen as shameful. Do you want us to go back to that? The audience let out a mix of claps and groans. Some shouted, "That's right!" while others booed softly, their reactions ricocheting around the studio. Blake threw up his hand slightly, frustrated. "No one's saying we go back to the 1950s, Joy. Don't twist my words. I'm saying family is the backbone of this country, and the way divorce laws work now, they don't help families. They rip them apart. Kids grow up without stability, and we're seeing the fallout in society every day." Ana Navarro spoke up, her voice cutting through the noise. "Blake, you're making it sound like divorce itself is the problem. But what about the issues that cause divorce? Money stress, infidelity, lack of communication. Making divorce harder doesn't solve those problems, it just traps people in them." Blake turned to her, his voice low but pointed. "Ana, making it harder to divorce forces people to face those issues instead of bailing. That's the point. You don't get to walk away without trying to fix what's broken." Joy slammed her hand lightly on the table, frustration boiling over. "You can't legislate effort, Blake. You can't make someone love harder or stay faithful because a law says so. You're living in a fantasy where stricter rules magically make people better partners. That's not how real life works." The tension drew a murmur from the crowd. One man shouted, "She's right," while another yelled, "Let him finish!" The studio had become a microcosm of the culture clash playing out before their eyes. Blake leaned in now, his voice booming with conviction. "Maybe it's not about making people better partners, Joy. Maybe it's about putting the kids first for once. About making the family, not the individual, the priority. That's what we've lost. Everyone's so focused on their own happiness, they forget what happens to the kids left in the middle of it all." That line hit hard. The audience gasped, and then the applause came, loud and scattered, but strong enough to make Joy's jaw tighten. Sonny tried to jump back in. "But Blake, we can't ignore that sometimes the healthiest thing for a child is to see their parent choose happiness, not misery. Isn't teaching them that self-respect matters also part of raising them well?" Before Blake could respond, Joy cut in again, her voice as sharp as a knife. "You know what, Blake? You've been divorced yourself, twice, so don't stand here lecturing people about working harder when you couldn't make it stick either." The audience erupted. Gasps, cheers, shouts. Some clapped wildly, others booed softly, the clash sending a shockwave through the room. Blake froze for half a second, then his face flushed. He shifted forward, pointing a finger in Joy's direction. "You want to drag my personal life into this? Fine. I lived it. I made mistakes. That's why I know how important this is. You don't go through what I went through and come out thinking divorce is just fine and dandy. It tears people up, Joy. It tears families apart. That's why I care about this so much." For the first time, the laughter was gone from Joy's face. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. The studio was crackling now, every word heavier than the last. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to calm the storm, but it was too late. The sparks had turned into flames, and everyone knew this was barreling toward something explosive.
The atmosphere on The View grew heavier as the debate between Blake Shelton and Joy Behar edged past the point of no return. What started as banter about divorce laws had now spiraled into a full-scale ideological clash. The audience, once chuckling at quips, now sat still, sensing a storm building between two voices too stubborn to bend. Blake leaned forward, his hand flat on the table, his Oklahoma drawl sharkening. "You're talking about divorce like it's some casual decision, Joy, like it's no bigger than changing your hairstyle. But I've lived through it. I've seen families torn up. It isn't just two people signing papers, it's kids left asking why their world got ripped apart." Joy shot him a look, her hands animated as they sliced the air. "Don't you dare put words in my mouth, Blake. I never said divorce was easy. I said it's necessary. Stricter laws won't protect families, they'll trap people in marriages that are already broken. What about the women stuck with abusive husbands? What about people who need a way out?" Blake's jaw clenched. "You're always bringing up the worst-case scenario. Abuse should never be tolerated. But let's be real, Joy. Most divorces don't happen because someone's being hurt. They happen because someone got bored. Someone thought the grass was greener. And you're telling me the law should make it easy to walk away from vows? Vows are supposed to mean something. The tension pulled the audience into silence. Blake's words carried a raw edge, the pain of personal experience bleeding through. Joy noticed it and pressed harder. You think people don't suffer enough during divorce? They already pay in heartbreak, money, time. You want to punish them even more because you think vows are sacred? That's not compassion, that's control. Blake's eyes narrowed, and for the first time that morning, his voice rose. Control. Joy, I'm talking about accountability. If someone makes a promise to love, to stay, to raise a family, you don't just get to break it because you're tired. What happened to fighting for your marriage? What happened to staying when it's hard instead of bailing? Sunny Hostin tried to interject, gently raising her voice. But Blake, don't you think the law can't measure the private struggles of a marriage? Sometimes stricter laws hurt the people they're meant to protect. But Blake was locked on to Joy. You know what stricter laws would do? They'd make people think twice before rushing into marriage or rushing out of it. Right now it's treated like a revolving door, and it shouldn't be. Joy smirked, but her tone carried more heat than humor. You sound like you want the government in people's bedrooms, Blake. If a marriage fails, it fails. You can't legislate love, and you can't scare people into commitment. Blake shot back, voice trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion. I'm not asking the government to legislate love. I'm asking it to respect it, to give weight to the promises people make. You know what divorce does to a kid? It tells them love is temporary. It tells them family is disposable. And maybe you're fine with that, Joy, but I'm not. The room seemed to freeze. Joy leaned back, folding her arms, visibly irritated but also unsettled by Blake's raw honesty. Don't you lecture me about kids, Blake. I know families who stayed together for the kids, and those kids grew up in war zones. Sometimes divorce is the only way to save them. Blake exhaled sharply, his face tightening. He pressed a hand against his chest. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life, Joy. Don't sit there and tell me it's just another option like ordering off a menu. That was the moment the audience felt it, the emotional flashpoint where the argument stopped being theoretical. It wasn't celebrity chatter anymore. It was one man's scarred truth colliding with Joy's unflinching belief in personal freedom. The clash wasn't just about divorce laws. It was about what love, responsibility, and family really meant, and whether those things could ever be protected by the law. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by a few gasps and murmurs. Joy tightened her lips, visibly caught between doubling down or pulling back. Blake sat rigid, eyes glassy, but unyielding. The line between debate and confession had blurred, and the studio felt the weight of both.
The debate had already grown fiery, but by now it was teetering on the edge of collapse. The audience at the View leaned forward, caught between anticipation and discomfort, watching Blake Shelton and Joy Behar square off like two forces that had stopped listening to each other. Joy, eyes narrowed and her tone sharp as ever, jabbed her finger toward Blake. What you're suggesting, Blake, is that we turn back the clock. Stricter divorce laws? You want people trapped in loveless, even toxic marriages because you think the family unit looks prettier on paper? That's not justice. That's cruelty. Blake's jaw tightened. He leaned toward her, his Oklahoma drawl cutting through the tension. Joy, don't twist my words. I'm not saying people should be chained together. But you can't just throw your hands up and say, well, it didn't work, let's all move on, when kids are crying themselves to sleep at night. Marriage is supposed to mean something. Families are supposed to mean something. Stricter laws don't trap people. They make people think twice before walking away. The room erupted in murmurs. Some clapped, others gasped. Sunny Hostin tried to mediate, but it was too late. Joy's voice came back, louder this time. You're talking about laws like they can magically fix broken people. That's naive, Blake. Sometimes leaving is the healthiest choice, especially for women who are stuck in marriages that eat them alive. That last line hit Blake like a spark to dry kindling. His voice rose, uncharacteristically raw. Naive? I've lived it, Joy. I've been through divorce, twice, and I know the scars it leaves, not just on the people splitting up, but on everyone around them. You sit here and make it sound like divorce is some empowering fresh start. It's not. It's pain. It's loss. And if we don't take it seriously, we're just teaching the next generation that commitment is optional. The audience let out a collective gasp at his vulnerability. For a moment, even Joy hesitated, but only for a moment. Then maybe, Blake, Joy shot back, her voice sharp as glass, you should have worked harder to save your marriages instead of lecturing the rest of us about what we should do with ours. The words hung heavy in the air. The crowd groaned, some booing, others shouting. Blake's face went pale with fury. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's low, Joy. You don't get to drag my personal life through the mud just because you don't like what I stand for. That's not debate. That's just ugly. Joy smirked, leaning back in her chair with folded arms. Ugly is trying to put women back in the dark ages with laws that control their lives. Call it what it is. Blake shook his head, his voice tight with finality. You know what's ugly? Pretending that tearing families apart is progress. If this is what passes for conversation here, I'm done. With that, he pulled off his mic, tossed it on the table, and stormed off stage to stunned gasps and applause. The audience was left buzzing, the panel in shock, and Joy Behar sitting with a thin smile that only deepened the drama of the moment. The set of The View had seen its share of clashes, but this was a breaking point that no one would soon forget.
The studio was still buzzing after Blake Shelton's dramatic walk-off. The audience, half on its feet and half glued to their chairs, exchanged wide-eyed looks as producers scrambled behind the cameras. The clash hadn't just been a debate. It had turned into a raw, unfiltered eruption of pain, pride, and principle. Joy Behar, still seated, smirked as though she had won by default, but even she seemed rattled. Her usual quick-fire humor was gone, replaced with a taut silence that made the air heavy. The other panelists tried to smooth things over, but the wound left by Blake's exit lingered like a bruise across the room. Outside of the studio, the conversation exploded online. Clips of Blake ripping off his microphone and storming out were shared in seconds, captioned with hashtags like #TeamBlake and #JoyWentTooFar. Fans argued in real time. Was Joy cruel to bring up Blake's divorces, or was Blake oversensitive for walking away? The comments section became its own battlefield, mirroring the clash on stage. For Blake Shelton, the emotional toll was obvious. He had walked in ready to defend families, to argue for the value of commitment in an age where divorce rates still troubled him. Instead, he walked out raw and exposed, his personal life thrown into the spotlight in a way he hadn't expected. Viewers who knew him as the easygoing country star saw a different side, a man still marked by the scars of divorce, who wanted others to take seriously what it cost. Joy, on the other hand, seemed unshaken on camera, but those close enough could see she was unsettled too. She prided herself on sharp debate, but this time her words had drawn real blood. For many, she had gone too far. For others, she had simply pressed on a nerve that Blake himself had left open by entering the discussion. The moment raised a larger question, one that stretched beyond celebrity drama. Are conversations about marriage, divorce, and family ever just theoretical? Or they always carry the weight of our personal histories? For Blake, the issue wasn't academic. It was lived, felt, and raw. For Joy, it was political and philosophical, rooted in decades of arguing for women's autonomy.
That clash of perspectives created something unforgettable, a collision of personal pain and ideological passion. The audience's reaction carried into the days that followed. Talk shows replayed the segment, podcasts dissected every word, and opinion writers weighed in. Some defended Joy, arguing that public figures shouldn't hide behind their personal lives if they're willing to legislate on others. Others rallied behind Blake, saying he was ambushed and that Joy's jab crossed the line that blurred debate into personal attack. In the end, both walked away changed. Blake left with his vulnerability laid bare, but also with the admiration of fans who saw his passion as genuine. Joy left with a victory in the debate, at least in her eyes, but also with critics accusing her of cruelty. What made the clash linger wasn't just the shouting or the storm-off, it was the raw truth behind it. Blake's plea wasn't for laws alone, but for a cultural reckoning with the way we treat marriage and family. Joy's defense wasn't only about freedom, but about survival for those who feel trapped. Neither side could fully win, because the stakes weren't abstract, they were deeply human. When the cameras went dark, the audience filed out, still murmuring, still unsettled. Some sided with Blake, others with Joy, but no one left indifferent. That was the mark of a moment that cut deeper than TV. As Blake Shelton walked away from The View, mic still ringing on the table, he carried with him both the scars of the past and the weight of standing up for what he believed in. And for viewers, the question remained, unresolved yet more urgent than ever. Should divorce laws be stricter to protect families or looser to protect freedom? That was the legacy of this clash, a reminder that sometimes the battles that erupt on stage are only echoes of the battles people are fighting in their own homes. And as the clip continued to spread across the internet, one thing became clear. This wasn't just another talk show fight. It was a cultural moment, etched into memory, with Blake Shelton storming off, becoming the symbol of a debate that no one could easily walk away from.